called us to a holy life. Not because of anything we have done, but because of his own purpose and grace. Now, I just said when I was talking about it last night, and I said, I was born 2 pounds in 62. Technology was just beginning to know anything about how to save a baby, or technology was just beginning. But how many know God is way above technology? God is technology. So God didn't need technology to save a child. God didn't need any technology back then. If that baby was going to live, God spoke it into existence. It was already done. Back in 1962, God already spoke it. It was already done. He already knew me before my mom and dad knew me. And he knew me, and he knew my end from my beginning. So it wasn't about what they said. No matter what, I was going to live. If they went in there and stood in the room and told my mom and dad, I'm sorry, she's just not going to make it. How many know? I had a praying grandmama. And she looked at this. She probably was like, whatever. And she went on. Guess what? Here I am, 61 years old. God had a purpose. He had a plan and a destiny for my life. So when you find out that God has purpose, plan for your life, how do we know that? Well, I'll tell you how. What does Romans 11:29 mean? Let's go to Romans. I guess I'll stay with Romans. Okay. Romans 11:29. Romans 11:29. Let's go to Romans 11:29. Let's see what he says. And that's in the New Testament. So go in the New Testament and look for Romans 11:29. Now remember, he has a purpose. He has a calling on your life. What's the calling? What's the purpose? And a destiny? Well, verse 29 says, for God's gifts and his call are irrevocable. He never withdraws them when once they are given, and he does not change his mind about those to whom he gives his grace or to whom he sends his call. What does that mean, y'all? Well, it means that God won't change his mind about what he has called you to do. Gifts and callings come without repentance. That means if you don't, disobedient, rebellious, running your own, running around acting like you had no sense. If God has called you, that calling is still there. Whether or not you have obeyed, here it goes. And if God gave you a gift, that gift is still there. Whatever God has called you to do, he has also gifted you to do it. He has gifted you. I mean, Romans 11:29 just said it. He's called you. He's gifted it to you. Whether you do it, whether you obey, a whole different story. But God has already called you. Some people say, what did God call me to do? A lot of people, you have lots of gifts, and they're there. Are they? How do you build them? How do you know? Well, what are our callings in Ephesians? Ephesians talks about it. Ephesians 4:1. Let's go to Ephesians 4:1. Now, there, Ephesians 4:1 it explains a whole lot, but let's go to Ephesians 4. Ephesians explains so much. I don't know if anybody talks about it in this manner, but when it says for the sake of the call, but when I said for the sake of the call is a holy calling, and that we should not take this for granted, nor should we misuse it. Or he says, when he says a holy calling, a holy. So here it is in Ephesians 4:1. And Ephesians 4:1 says in the Amplified Classics, I therefore, the prisoner for the Lord, appeal to and beg you to lead a life worthy of the divine calling to which you have been called, with behavior that is a credit to the summons to God's service. Summons. Have you ever been summoned to court? Have y'all been summoned? You know, sometimes when you're summoned to stand trial, sometimes when you're summoned, like if you have to go get a divorce, or, you know, if you're summoned to sit on a trial, you know, if sometimes we have to go to court duty, you know what I'm saying? You know, jury duty. Okay, summons. So, in this, it says, worthy of a divine calling to which you have been called, with behavior that is a credit to the summons to God's service. We all, in some form, are summoned to God's service. And the second verse of Ephesians 4:2, living as becomes you with complete lowliness of mind. Lowliness of mind, I used to think, and I never did get this all the time, humility. I think a lot of us misunderstand humility. It doesn't mean we have to walk around with our head down, looking all we didn't always get that. But humility is just really staying in your place and keeping your pride and your mouth and a whole lot of things in place. Sometimes it's just best to be quiet and shut up when you really want to speak real loud and say what you want to say. But sometimes it just ain't best to say it. Sometimes it's just best to just when you really want to. And he said, or you know that you don't have to apologize, but you apologize anyway. You know, humble yourself and just apologize, although they may never apologize. But you say, and then they'll tell you, I forgive you, when you be like, what did I do? But you go and apologize anyway to keep the peace. Meekness, unselfish, gentleness, mildness, those kind of behaviors, they don't come easy. With patience, bearing with one another, and making allowances. That's that part I was just talking about. Because you love one another, making allowances. Like, even though they may be in the wrong, and they may be in the wrong. They may be wanting you to say something that you don't want to say, and you just finally just go, okay, we'll just agree to disagree, or we'll just all right. You know, and sometimes you know how people just say, I just want to say my truth. I just need to say my piece. When really, for you, a child of God, you don't always need to say your piece. You need to be quiet. That part I'm learning. And that is really the love of God, when you really don't need to say your piece. So it says in the third verse, be eager and strive earnestly to guard and keep the harmony and oneness produced by the Spirit and the binding power of peace. Man, I just said, see, I'm telling you something. I'm not even really looking at this, but as soon as I say it, I read it. There is one body, one Spirit, just as there is also one hope that belongs to the calling you received. My God. See, God ain't doing nothing but talking to me. There is one body, one Spirit, just as there is also one hope that belongs to the calling you received. And there is one Lord, one faith, and one baptism. One God, Father of us all, who is above all, sovereign over all, pervading all, and living in us all. Yet grace, the 7th verse, God's unmerited favor was given to each of us individually, not indiscriminately, but in different ways, in proportion to measure of Christ's rich and bounteous gifts. I mean, you know, because God's rich in it, in his rich gifts, and he gave it to us all differently. Again, I want to say, yet grace, his unmerited favor, was given to each of us individually, but in different proportions to the measure of Christ. He doesn't give us all the same. So I can't go and say I want what such and such have. Oh, I want her calling. I want her gift. I want this. No. That ain't how God do it. He just said it. He said in different proportions. Your calling may not be her call. You can't take your mantle. He did not call you to be a prophet. He did not call you to be an apostle. He did not call you to be a pastor. How can you walk in someone's lane that he didn't call you in? He didn't give you that measure of grace. And he just said it. He does not give you the measure of someone else's grace. Someone can walk in a certain amount of grace because God has given it to them. But he may not have given it to you. And you try to walk in it and you could die doing that. And so we can't walk in someone else's grace, unmerited favor, because God did not give us the measure. He says it. I want to read 7 again because it's just something we all got to get. Yet grace, God's unmerited favor, was given to each of us individually, but in different ways, in proportion to the measure of Christ. In the measure of Christ's gift. Therefore it is said, when he ascended on high, he led captivity captive. He led a train of vanquished foes. He bestowed gifts on men. And if you read Psalm 68:18, I'll go back to that. He'll tell you. But he ascended. Now what can this? He ascended means but that he had previously descended from the heights of heaven into the depths, the lowest parts of the earth. And he who descended is the very same as he who also had ascended high above all the heavens, that his presence might fill all things, the whole universe, from the lowest to the highest. And that 11th verse is what we hear about gifts. Okay, gifts, callings. And his gifts were varied. He himself appointed and gave men to us, some to be apostles, special messengers, some prophets, inspired preachers and expounders, some evangelists, preachers of the gospel, traveling missionaries, some pastors, shepherds of his flock, and teachers. His intention was the perfecting and the full equipping of the saints, his consecrated people, that they should do the work of ministering toward building up Christ's body, the church. And the church is each one of us. That it might develop until we all attain oneness in the faith and in the comprehension of the full, accurate knowledge of the Son of God, that we might arrive at a really mature manhood, the completeness of personality, which is nothing less than the standard height of Christ's own perfection, the measure of stature of the fullness of Christ, and the completeness found in him. In him. Not you. Not somebody else. Not another man of God. Not another woman of God. In him. In Christ. No one else. And that's something that I believe that we all need to get. And this is the kind of calling spoken to the Ephesians. When you sincerely seek to please God in all you do, and when you honor him by how you do your work and live your life, you are walking worthy of your calling and living a life of significance, of importance, of significance. Then you're living a life worthy of the calling that God put you in. The calling, then the profession, the choice of practice, that he put you in. And when you ask for spiritual calling in the Bible, what are you talking about? Apostle Paul in the New Testament, he describes calling summons from God to